Hello, everybody. My name is Naveed Nasir. I'm a channel sales engineer. This presentation is going to be on a security center system design training. So we're going to be giving a brief overview on basically how to do a system design. If you have any questions and such, please do post them in the question section in the chat, and we'll get to them as soon as we can. So without further ado, let's get started. So the agenda for this presentation will be system design considerations, what the difference is between unification versus integration, open versus proprietary system, the Security Center platform itself, what the architecture and terminologies are, what the software packages are, server and workstations, what the system requirements are, and sizing a server and workstation. And following that, we'll do a bill of materials, how to design a bill of materials using the information that we've gained. So how would you define unified versus an integrated system? So let's look at an integrated solution. So an integrated solution, let's say, for example, we wanted to have an IP surveillance system, where obviously we need to have our IP cameras, and we need a system or a video system to be able to manage those IP cameras. Now, let's assume for a moment that we wanted to add access control to it as well. We wanted to have an access control system. So for your access control system, you would need obviously an access control management platform to go with it as well. Now, if we wanted to be able to view our IP cameras, we would need to have a client software that can log into our video system and be able to view those cameras. Now, provided there is an integration between the video system and the access control system, we'll be able to pull some of the data from the access control system into our video client software. And vice versa, if we have an access control management system, a client software for that, that may have some sort of integration with the video system to be able to pull video data related to the access control system. Now, in both of these scenarios, each system is a separate device. If, for example, you wanted to make changes or updates to an IP camera system, you would need to log into the IP camera solution to be able to make those updates. And the same goes for the access control as well. If you wanted to make some updates to the access control system, you would need to log into that specific device. Now, if we wanted to do, say, for example, a firmware update or anything like that, we would need to do that on each individual system as well. The issue with this is that you have a larger installation environment, so you're basically having to manage each individual system as you go along. And there's also an issue that in some scenarios, you may not be able to get all the data that you want. For example, you may be getting some of the access control information that you want under the video client software, but you may not be getting all of it, and vice versa. Under the access control environment, you may be getting some of the video information, but not all of it. Now, in the comparison, a unified solution, you would have your IP cameras and your access control system being managed from one single unified platform. The advantage of that is that your devices are all being managed from one single platform, and you have one single client software as well. So by doing so, you're able to pull all your relevant access control data and your video data under one platform to be able to view and manage your system. If you needed to make any kind of updates or changes to your platform, you just need to log into that specific that platform only. You don't need to log into individual platforms. So for example, if I wanted to make changes to my IP cameras, or if I wanted to make changes to my door schedules, I just have to log into one single platform. So it simplifies my installation environment and the use of my solution greatly. So diving in depth a little bit with the differences between a unified and integrated solution. So In an integrated solution, you could have two or more systems to manage. Whereas in a unified solution, you would have a single platform to be able to log in to manage your access control, your video, your license plate recognition, your intrusion panels, and so on. That also means that you have one single user interface for configuring and managing your devices. Now, this can be a huge advantage because your learning curve is considerably reduced. You're not having to basically learn two or more systems and how they function. You're learning one system to be able to manage all your devices connected to it. This can also be of huge benefit to the end user as well, persons who are actually using the system, because they're actually only having to learn one single platform as well. The other advantages are that you're getting all your event information such as alarms and reports and other such information from one single platform. You're not having to log into individual platforms to get different kinds of event information. So say, for example, you have an alarm being triggered, you may need to log into your access control or your intrusion panel system to be able to get that data. Whereas in a unified solution, that information would pop up on your single user interface. Some of the other advantages also is that you have a single instance of a database. So by having a single instance of a database, you're having to basically manage only one database. Whereas with an integrated solution, you could have multiple databases depending on your solution. You could have a database for your video, you could have a database for your access control, and another database for your license plate recognition, and any other third-party software that you have. So it does kind of complicate matters when it comes to management of your solution. Now, one of the most important functions also having a unified solution is native high availability and redundancy. So basically what this means is you're able to have redundancy and such on one system. You're not having to have redundancy solutions for different packages in an integrated environment, which can obviously simplify your installation environment and also your management of your platform. Now, moving on from that, talking about unified open platform versus a proprietary platform. So in a proprietary platform, you have a limited product choice because you're limited to what the vendor can provide. Your software is limited to what the hardware can support. And when you're basically designing a solution, you're designing a solution based on the hardware limitations. Sometimes that means that it does not meet the customer's needs because you're having to cater a solution based on your hardware capabilities. Now, in comparison, a unified open platform, the software is hardware agnostic. Basically, this means that you can support access control or IP cameras or intercoms and badge printers from various manufacturers. You're not limited to one specific product from one specific hardware device. This also means that you have the flexibility to choose the most capable hardware when you're building your solution for your customer. You're basically building a solution that can fit the customer's needs by using different technologies from different manufacturers. Some of the other advantages are that you can also have a reusable solution for your access control. Typically, most of the access control components in an already installed environment can be reused under a unified open platform. This may not be the case in a proprietary solution where you may have to replace the entire access control hardware that's already installed. This also means that you may have a higher cost in the longer run as well. One of the biggest advantages also of having a unified open platform is that it's very flexible. As the customer's needs grow, the solution can develop with the customer. So from a small installed environment to a larger installed environment, the solution can grow as the customer's needs grow as well. In comparison, a proprietary system may be limited. You may need to replace the system, or you may need to upgrade the system via various methods to be able to grow with the customer's needs. So this basically brings us to the Genetec Security Center platform. The Genetec Security Center platform is basically a management platform. Some of its core modules are Synergis, which is for IP access control, Omnicast, which is for video management, and AutoView, which is for license plate recognition. Along with this, there are obviously other additional modules that can be added to it, such as graphical maps, intrusion monitoring, communication management, mobile solutions, video analytics, and so on. And on top of that, there are further add-ons that can be used. These could be from third-party manufacturers who are working with the Genetec Security Center platform. As the Genetec Security Center platform is an open standard ecosystem, we are partnered with various manufacturers. This page basically is showing some of the manufacturers that we have partnered with for various functions and capabilities of the Genetec Security Center platform, such as for intrusion, access control, cameras, building automation, elevator dispatch, intercom, and so on. This diagram basically explains some of the capabilities of the Unified Security Center architecture. So as can be seen over here, the Genetec Security Center platform is very flexible. It could be installed in a small environment where you have less than 50 IP cameras and less than 64 access control readers. In a medium-sized environment where you have less than 250 cameras and up to 256 readers, and in an enterprise environment where you could have more than 250 cameras and more than 256 readers. In each of these environments, the standard system, the professional system, and the enterprise system, each one of these is a standalone solution. Basically, each one can behave independently. Along with that, we also provide Genetec Stratocast, which is for IP camera management in the cloud. And we also have access control and license plate recognition for security as a service in the cloud as well. Now, all of these options, all of these solutions, like the standard, the professional enterprise system, can be centrally managed by a federated device. So in this scenario, what basically this means is that you could log into each of these locations from the federated site to be able to pull video data, access control data, and so on, all from your federated location without interfering with each of these individual sites. So this can be of enormous advantage if you have an installed environment where your devices are installed at various locations. A central location can still log in and view video data as well as access control data, all from one location. Now, the Security Center software itself has basically three application interfaces. One is called the server admin, the other is a config tool, and the third is a security desk. The server admin's responsibility is to be able to configure the Security Center server and update license information. They can also be used to manage the directory and database and change information in there. The config tool is basically used to be able to configure your Security Center environment. For example, being able to add cameras, access control, changing door schedules, adding intrusion panels, adding users, and so on, all can be done under the config tool. The security desk software is basically what is used to be able to view your data. So being able to view your video, your access control events, your alarm events, and so on would all be used by the security desk. So majority of end users will be logging into the security desk platform to be able to view their information relevant to them. Now, it's important to be able to understand the difference between various features and components of the Security Center platform. We have server roles, which are the components of the software designed to carry out specific tasks, such as directory, archiver, media router, access manager, and so on. And then you also have entities. Now, entities are used to connect and utilize various devices being used by the Security Center platform. So for example, one of your devices could be IP cameras, another device could be your doors, users, alarms, and schedules. These are all considered entities. Going into a bit more detail about roles, some of the core roles are the directory role. Now, this is basically responsible for authentication of all client connections, configuring of the SQL database, alarm management, audit trails, macro executions, and schedules. And then we have the media router role. The media router role basically establishes streaming sessions between the stream source and camera, which could be the camera or the archiver, and the device that is requesting it, which is obviously the client. So routing decisions are based on the location and the transmission capabilities of all parties involved. And basically, the media router ensures that all video streams use the best route to get to the destination. The archiver role is responsible for the discovery and control of video units. So basically, the archiver role is able to perform communication between the system and the video units, which are established. All events such as motion, video analytics, and so on are forwarded by the archiver. You can also have multiple instances of the archiver role. Now, the read director is basically an agent. It needs to be configured on each network to be able to detect the network capabilities and display the current status. It's basically responsible for stream handling, the TCP, UDP multicast conversions, as well as redirections and unicast duplication. Now, we also have Access Manager for basically managing our access control solution, basically commanding and controlling of access control doors and access control events. And we also have our LPR Manager, which is for managing license plate recognition solutions as well. Now, some of the additional roles that are most commonly used are Federation, Active Directory, Intrusion Manager, Sipelia, Mobile, and Web Client. So as I mentioned previously, Federation basically allows a user to be able to pull data from various different sites onto a federated location. So you can pull, video data, access control data, and so on. So the server that is being used to pull the data needs to have the Federation license installed on it. The other devices that are being used, other devices that are installed at various locations, do not need to have the Federation role installed. Only the server that is being used to be able to view the federated locations. Now, Active Directory basically allows you to synchronize your Active Directory database. So you can basically have your Active Directory database being used and synchronized into the Security Center platform so that you can create user groups and such using the Active Directory database. Intrusion Manager is basically for alarm panels, basically managing communication between these panels to be able to log intrusion events and so on. Whereas Sipelia is basically a SIP-based communication protocol between security desks and the various intercoms and video intercom devices that are connected to the locations. Mobile basically allows you to have connections via your mobile phone, whereas a web client allows you to monitor your Security Center platform from your browser without requiring the additional plugins and such. Now, one thing I'd like to point out is that, as I mentioned before, is that we have obviously these three core modules, Omnicast, Synergis, and AutoView. Now, as you can see over here, for each of these environments or each of these modules, there are some common features that are supported. So all of them will have a directory and media router. And we have obviously some other common features like Health Monitor, Zone Manager, Map Manager, and Report Manager that are also commonly used features and functions of each of these individual modules. Now, you could have a solution where you have, your standalone video, or you could have a solution where you have standalone access control or license plate recognition, but you could also have a solution where all three are being utilized under one platform. So in those scenarios, you would have a common directory and media router to manage all those. So now we're basically going to focus on the Security Center Omnicast. Omnicast is for video management solution. So Omnicast comes under 3 different packages: a standard, a pro, and an enterprise. Under the standard package, you can support up to 50 IP cameras. You have up to 5 clients logging in at the same time. Now, these 5 clients could be logging in through the Security Desk client software or through the web browser. And you can have up to 1 archiver. In a Pro package, you can support a maximum of 250 IP cameras, up to 10 clients logging in simultaneously, and you can have up to 20 archivers. Now, as you can see over here under the enterprise environment, you have an unrestricted connection for number of cameras, clients, and the number of archivers. Now, some of the common features that you have for all 3 packages are Plan Manager, GPU acceleration for video decoding, video stream and recording encryption, as well as H.265 support. Now, what you will also notice on this table is that you have options for failover for directory and archiver, as well as federation. But these options are only supported if you're using an enterprise package. So let's assume for a moment that you have an environment that you need to support, say, 30 or 40 IP cameras. Now, in theory, you could go for a standard package in that scenario. But let's assume for a moment that the end user wants to have failover capabilities or wants to be able to support federation. In that kind of scenario, even though you're only supporting 30 or 40 IP cameras, you would still need to utilize the enterprise package, because obviously that feature is only an optional feature available under the enterprise environment. Some of the other features that are commonly available under all 3 packages is edge storage, virtualization support, locking of your workstations, automatically locking your workstations, password aging, user authentication management, and watermarking and video encryption. Now, what you can notice over here is that the Active Directory integration is only available under the Pro or Enterprise package as an optional add-on feature. So once again, referring back to my previous statement, let's say, for example, you have a small installation environment where you only have 30 or 40 cameras, but the user also wants to have Active Directory integration. So in that kind of scenario, you have the option of either recommending the Pro package or the Enterprise package, because those are the only 2 packages that have the optional support for Active Directory integration. Now, these slides that I'm showing will be shared with you guys later on under a PDF format. The Security Center Synergist, as I mentioned before, is for access control. It has a similar concept to the Omnicast video management, that it has various packages as well. In this scenario, you have a standard, a pro, enterprise, and security as a service, which is basically referring to access control being managed under a cloud-based solution. Now, anytime that you're utilizing a cloud-based solution, it is strongly recommended that you contact your channel sales engineers or your sales engineers or your regional sales people for assistance on that. Cloud solutions have capabilities and restrictions that need to be discussed before you go ahead and recommend such an option. Now, similar to the Omnicast, you can see that under the standard package, you can support up to 64 readers and up to 5 clients logging in, and you have 1 access manager. Whereas under the Pro package, you have up to 256 access control readers, up to 10 clients, and 2 access managers, whereas under the enterprise solution is unrestricted. Now, once again, similar to the Omnicast, you have optional features available, such as threat management and Active Directory support, which are available under the Pro and Enterprise level solutions. So global cardholder management and federation would only be available under the Enterprise package. Now, the Synergist Cloud Link is basically an intelligent device for basically supporting your access control hardware. It can be powered via either Ethernet, power over Ethernet, or using a 12-volt power supply. It can support a connection to access control devices via RS-485. It can also support connection to access control devices over a network. So this basically gives you the flexibility of supporting multiple access control equipment from HID, Mercury, Access, and electronic locks from ASA Abloy, Allegion, Salto, and many others as well. So having a Synergis CloudLink gives you flexibility to basically build an access control solution from various manufacturers to provide a unified access control capabilities. Now, what you will also notice on this diagram is that we have Genetec Sharp V, which is our AutoView license plate recognition cameras, which can also be synced with the Synergis CloudLink. So this could be used for parking entry and exit with a parking gate. So you can utilize the license plate of a vehicle as a credential for entry and exit to a parking location. Now, I'd like to briefly touch on the StreamVault series, which will go into more detail later on. Now, we do have StreamVault models like the SV100 and the SV300 series that do not require the use of a CloudLink device. In that kind of scenario, you can only support a limited number of readers, as can be seen on the table. Like, for example, the StreamVault 100 series can support a maximum of 16 access control readers, whereas the StreamVault 300 series can support a maximum of 100 access control readers. Now, what you should notice over here is that the StreamVault SV100 and 300 series can only support a connection to access control devices that support an Ethernet connection, not an RS-485 connection. As I showed in the previous diagram, the Synergis CloudLink can support connections to access control devices via RS-485, as well as via an IP network connection. Now, under the StreamVault 100 and the StreamVault 300 series, we are restricted to only supporting access control devices that are under the network connection. So this table gives an overview of some of the supported downstream entities. Now, I'd like to point out on this table that the StreamVault Synergis CloudLink device can support a maximum of 256 readers. So this basically means that if you have an installed environment that you need to go exceed above that, or perhaps you have an installed environment where you have multiple locations, you may be better off using multiple Synergis CloudLink devices to be able to manage all of those locations. Following this, we'll be discussing briefly the Sipelia and intrusion detection system. So we won't be going into much detail, just enough information to let you know as to what these are. So Sipelia basically refers to our plug and roll for Security Center. It uses SIP, which refers to Session Initiation Protocols, to make and receive and manage SIP-based voice and video calls over a network. So Sipelia can be used to integrate existing video and access control panels with intercom systems as well. And an intrusion panel can basically be a valuable asset to add to a Security Center platform. So you can unify your intrusion panel with your access control and your video data to provide you a better picture. So for example, a user can, when an event is triggered from an intrusion panel, they can verify that event with video as well as access control information to go with it. So yeah, I'm just going through a brief introduction on Sipelia and intrusion panels. I'm not going to be doing an in-depth discussion on each of these because these are more than is what is the scope of this discussion. So now moving on to that, we're going to discuss briefly about StreamVault. So StreamVault is basically Genetec hardware platform for managing your video and your access control and your various other devices. So StreamVault devices are optimized to be able to manage the Genetec Security Center platform. So as I mentioned previously, we have the SV100 and the 300 series, but we also have, the 1000 series, the 2000 and 4000 series, and the 7000 series. Depending on the user's requirement would determine which version of the StreamVault we would use. So utilizing this information, let's look at this specific table over here, which gives us some performance capabilities of the StreamVault servers. So for example, the StreamVault 100 and the 300 series are suitable for small installation environments. You can support a maximum of up to 32 IP cameras under the 300 series and a maximum of up to 100 readers with an onboard storage capability of up to 40 terabytes. Now, the 1000 series and above would be suitable for mid-size and larger installation environments. So let's say, for example, you have an installed environment where you have multiple IP cameras. One of the reasons why you would say, for example, choose a StreamVault 4000 series over a 1000 series would be if the bit rate of all the IP cameras put together from the installation environment would be up to 2000 megabits per second. So as you can see, the max throughput of the 4000 series and the 2000 series and such is up to 2000 megabits per second. So if your IP camera's total bit rate of all IP cameras put together was exceeding that, then obviously you would use a higher powered StreamVault server. Now, if you look at, say, for example, the 1000 series, the max throughput of that is 200 megabits per second. So basically what this means is that if you have an installed environment where the bit rate of all cameras put together was less than 200 megabits per second, then obviously the 1000 series would be suitable for that. Now, obviously there are other scenarios or environments that you need to take into consideration when picking a StreamVault server. You would also need to obviously determine what the storage requirements are, what kind of RAID the user wants, and also what the location requirements are also. If you were sizing a server for an installation environment, you could use this table over here to give you an overview as to how you could how you would build your own server. So for example, under the recommended server specs, you have an Intel Xeon server, an E5-2620 with 16 gig of RAM and up to 80 gigabytes of SATA for storing of the operating system. Now, in this kind of environment, you can support up to a maximum of 300 megabits of throughput. So what this basically means is that your bit rate of all cameras put together needs to be less than 300 megabits per second. Now, if you're going above 300 megabits, say for example, up to 500 megabits, you would need a slightly more capable server. So for example, in this scenario, we're utilizing a server with similar specs to the recommended, but with more hard drives. So it's using up to 12 hard drives, which could be set up in a RAID 5 or RAID 6 environment. So by doing so, we can obviously go to a higher throughput capability of up to 500 megabits per second. So it should be quite obvious from this that it's not only the CPU's capability, but also the compatible hardware that is being used on the platform that determines a server's performance. Now, if you're going for a high performance system, which is very video intensive, we would obviously recommend that you contact the Genetec support channel sales to get an idea as to what kind of server you should use, such as the StreamVault Series 2000 or 4000 series. The reason why we would recommend this is that these servers are designed to be able to, basically they are designed to host the Genetec Security Center platform, and the performance capabilities have been measured to be able to manage the amount of information that you want to send through. Now, obviously, if you have your servers, you need to also have workstations to be able to view your data from the servers. So the table over here gives an overview of the minimum, the recommended, and the high performance capabilities. So as can be seen over here for the recommended and the high performance capability, we would recommend something above an Intel Core i7 server and up to 8 gigabytes of RAM for a recommended, whereas 16 gigabytes of RAM for a high performance server. Now, what you will also notice on the recommended and high performance server workstations in comparison to the minimum workstation is that they're also using a graphics card. So they're basically being able to utilize the graphics card to provide graphics GPU acceleration, to provide better capabilities and more viewing abilities. The table over here basically gives an overview as to what you should be able to do with a minimum server workstation or recommended workstation or a high performance workstation. So as can be seen, by having a GPU acceleration, we can support a higher quantity number of cameras. So under a CIF environment, which is a resolution of 352 by 240, we can support up to 78 camera display under a high performance server. Whereas under a VGA connection, it will be up to 58 cameras, which is obviously a 640 by 480 resolution. And under full HD for a high performance server, you should be able to display up to 26 cameras under a high performance environment. So now we're basically going to discuss the information that we've gathered about Synergis, about Omnicast, and about StreamVault on how we would build a bill of materials using that information. So let's take this diagram. We have a standard system, we have a professional system, and we have an enterprise system over here. So as you can see over here on the standard system, we have less than 50 IP cameras and less than 64 readers. Under the professional system, we have less than 250 cameras and up to 256 readers. And then we also have an enterprise system where we have greater than 250 cameras and more than 256 readers, as well as a federation system as well. So we're going to go step by step through as to how you would build a standard system, how you would build a professional system, and how you would build an enterprise, as well as a federation system as well, just to give everybody an idea as to how you would build each one of these in various environments. So let's start with a standard system over here. Now, one option for building a standard system would be to use a StreamVault 100 or 300 or 350 series. Now, why you would choose one of these is that basically because they're an all-in-one solution. The servers basically come with the pre-installed package for cameras, as well as your access control and your Sipelia and your intrusion, as well as Active Directory and so on. So for example, if a customer has a requirement for say less than 50 cameras, you could recommend them the StreamVault 350 series without having to go through a comprehensive bill of materials coding individual licenses for cameras and access control and so on. Now, what should be noted over here is also the throughput capabilities. As you can see over here, the SV350, the StreamVault 350 series, has a max throughput of 100 megabits per second. So that basically means that whatever cameras and devices that you're using to connect to this, the combined bitrate of all of those devices needs to be below 100 megabits per second. If you have an installed environment that has a requirement to go beyond that, then obviously these all-in-one solutions may not be suitable. You may need a more powerful server in that kind of environment, which obviously then means that you will also need to build your licenses out as well. But if you're having a small installation, as I mentioned before, the all-in-one solution would be the best option because you are getting a very comprehensive packages to go with it to provide a complete install for your customer. Now, moving on from that, let's say, for example, we were building our own solution. So we have, our Sipelia, we have less than 50 cameras, we have access control, and we also want to have a server to go with it. So we would obviously need to first of all quote our base software, which will be the Genetec Security Center base version 5.9. Now you would also notice over here that we have our base package. So the Omnicast is, as I mentioned before, for video. So we would have, we would quote the Omnicast base package if we were quoting IP cameras. And along with that, we would have the Synergist standard if we were quoting access control. And then along with that, we would also have Sipelia base, GSE Sipelia base package if we were quoting the intercom as well. Now, depending on how many licenses or how many cameras or access control devices we have connected, would determine what kind of license we would have. So for example, for IP cameras, under the standard package, we would need to quote this part number over here. So we would need to quote out the GSE-OM-S-1C for our IP camera connections. Now, if we are taking over some legacy analog cameras using an analog camera adapter, then we will need to use the GSE-OM-S-1P AC for our analog camera connection. Now, if we were adding licenses for our Sipelia, we would need to obviously add the Sipelia license to go with it as well. The number over here would determine how many cameras you have. So say, for example, you had 50 cameras, then you would obviously need to quote 50 of the GSE-OM-S-1C for our IP camera licenses. Now, what you will also notice over here is that it is not mentioning over here the access control readers. So the access control part number is shown at the bottom over here. So depending on how many readers you have would determine the licenses for that. But if you are purchasing the access control devices through Genetec, be those Mercury or HID or any of the others, if those access control devices are being purchased through Genetec, you do not need to mention the license number for that, as it will be included in the license package in the Security Center software. Some of the commonly added options for a standard system would be, the mobile client if somebody needs to log in via a smartphone or something. Or they may also want to have USB enrollment for access control to be able to connect a USB enrollment device to adding access control card and such directly from the desktop computer being used. So for hardware, as you can see over here, for example purposes, we're using the Synergist CloudLink device. So as I mentioned previously, one single Synergist CloudLink device can manage up to 256 readers. Now we would obviously need to have our Mercury controllers in this scenario to be able to manage our access control and also the interface panel to go with it. Now, if we wanted to have enclosures to be able to house the Mercury panels, we have obviously the option of using the 6 reader with the CloudLink option, which is a life safety power version of the enclosures. And we also have a 16 reader with CloudLink option as well, which is also by life safety power. Along with that, obviously, you need to also quote your readers to go with it. So depending on what kind of readers you need, you may need to have a reader with keypad. The part number mentioned over here is the reader with keypad, whereas the part number mentioned at the bottom over here is for a reader without keypad. So if we were quoting it for a customer access control and video-based solution, these are basically the part numbers and packages that we would require. Now keep in mind, as I mentioned before, we are not mentioning the licenses over here for our access control because we are purchasing the hardware as well. If for some reason you are not purchasing the hardware through Genetec, then as I mentioned before, you would need to quote the number of readers that you have, and the license number would be shown as the bottom over here, would be part of your license code as well. So let's take a bill of materials for 50 IP cameras with 2 video intercoms and 64 readers. So the table over here basically shows the parts and such that we would need to quote for this solution. So we would need to have our video components, the Genetec Omnicast package, standard package, and our IP camera connection license, as well as our video intercom package and the video intercom license, as well as our access control hardware as well to go with it. Along with this, we can see that what kind of StreamVault server we would need. So I'm using the BCD video calculator over here to be able to determine what my throughput would be, what my bandwidth consumption would be, to determine what kind of server I would need. So for example, over here, I'm utilizing 50 IP cameras, and I'm utilizing them at 15 frames per second, and I want 30 days of retention. So for that kind of environment, using that, using the BCD video calculator, I can get my total bit rate. Now, using that information, I can then determine what kind of StreamVault server I would need. So in this scenario, I'm choosing an SV110E with 64 terabytes of storage. So with that RAID level 5, I'm going to have about 48 terabytes of usable storage in that scenario. Now I'm also coding in this a StreamVault workstation to be able to log into my cameras and my access control and my video intercom and be able to configure my StreamVault device, my StreamVault server. Now, moving on from there, let's look at briefly over the Synergis Omnicast Professional package. So the Professional package can support a maximum of 250 cameras and up to 256 readers. So the diagram over here gives us an overview as to what kind of components and such we would need. So obviously we have 250 IP cameras, up to 250 IP cameras, our Sipalia reader, our access control devices, and our servers to go with it. So in this scenario, it's very similar in concept to the standard package. But the difference, as you can see over here, is for the Omnicast Professional, we're quoting the part number GSC-OM-P, whereas in the previous package, we were quoting GSC-OM-S for standard. But as we're using a professional, it's obviously the part number is different. Also, as you can see over here for licenses, we have a slightly different part number for our IP camera licenses, as well as our analog camera licenses and Sipalia connection as well. Once again, I'd like to point out over here that I'm not mentioning the license and here for our access control. As I mentioned before, if you are purchasing the access control devices through Genetec, then you don't need to quote the licenses for them. That will be included as part of your purchase. But as I mentioned also before, is that if you need to purchase licenses for access control, the part number over here is quoted at the bottom of the screen. So let's take in a scenario where we have 250 IP cameras. We have our 15 frames per second recording of these IP cameras for 30 days at 1080p resolution, and we're expecting 100% motion all the time. And we also want to quote in this scenario Active Directory integration. We want to have up to 5 video intercom and up to 256 readers. Out of those 256 readers, we want to have 40 readers which have keypad connection, keypad option, and 216 readers which do not have keypad. So how will we go about doing this? So first of all, we would look into what kind of server would be suitable. So using the BCD video calculator, we can input our values to get us the bandwidth consumption. So as we can see over here, the bandwidth consumption for this specific environment with 250 cameras at this resolution and frame rate is 737 megabits per second. So this is obviously quite a high bandwidth consumption, which means that we would need to have multiple servers to be able to host that. Now, if we use the link at the bottom of the screen over here, we can open up the worksheet over here that we have to give us an idea as to how we would go about building our servers. So this table over here And this will also be included after the presentation for you guys to download. Gives us an overview as to what the server capabilities are for each environment. So as you can see over here, if you're using a StreamVault 2000 series or 4000 series with up to 4 hard drives, we have a max throughput under an archiver mode only of 570 megabits per second. Whereas if we have the StreamVault SV2000 or 4000 series with up to 8 hard drives or more, you can see under the archiver option, we have up to 670 megabits per second of recording capabilities. But if we're using this as an archiver and as a directory, we have up to 570 megabits of storage, 570 megabits of throughput. Sorry about that, 570 megabits of throughput capability. So as we have a total bandwidth consumption of up to 737 megabits per second, we would need to have basically 2 devices to be able to manage that. So in this scenario over here, we are mentioning that we would require an SV211 series. So we would need to have 2 of these devices to be able to fulfill the 737 megabits of bandwidth consumption. So in this scenario, you would have one server acting as a directory and archiver, and another server acting as an archiver only. So this would be all being managed from your main server over here. The archiver number 2 over here is providing the extra storage and throughput capabilities to be able to record video data from all cameras put together. So the part numbers for this kind of environment are shown over here. Oops, sorry. So once again, similar in concept to previously, we would obviously quote the Omnicast Professional package, and then the license option over here is for Omnicast Professional IP cameras for up to 250 cameras. Along with that, we have a Sipelia base, and the number of video intercoms, as I mentioned before, we have 5 video intercoms, so we need to quote 5 licenses for our video intercom solution as well. Now for our access control, once again, we would have the Synergist Professional package with the Synergist Cloud Link and our Mercury controllers, the LP1502 being the intelligent controller, and the MR52 being the interface devices to be able to connect to our various readers to go with it. As was mentioned in the original example, we have a requirement for 40 readers with keypad and 216 readers without keypad. So for our readers, we would quote the 40 NKS00, 0000, which is the signal reader without keypad. And the other part number, as mentioned over here, is for with keypad. We would also need to quote an add-on component if we were using Active Directory. So we would need to have one quantity of the Active Directory license to be able to support Active Directory functions to go with it. And as I mentioned before, this would be the StreamVault server, the SV211 series StreamVault server, to be able to act as an archiver and directory as well. Now, moving on from this, if we were quoting an enterprise level solution, obviously we would have greater than 250 cameras and more than 256 readers. So in an enterprise solution, similar in concept to previous, we have similar part numbers with a slight difference. So for example, as you can see over here for the base package for Omnicast Enterprise, we are quoting the GSC-OM-E option. Whereas with the for Synergist Access Control, we are quoting the GSC-SY-E for Synergist Enterprise as well. For Sipelia, we're obviously using still the Sipelia base option over here. For access control, like I mentioned before, as we are quoting the hardware to go with it, we don't need to quote licenses for our access control. But as you can see, we are quoting the licenses for our IP cameras and for our analog IP, cameras, as well as our Sipelia. Now, some of the commonly used features in an enterprise level solution would also be a failover directory and Active Directory syncing, as well as threat level management, plan manager, and so on. We will go into a bit more detail about failover directory and failover archives later on to give you a more in-depth understanding as to what they are. So let's take an example over here that we have 1,000 IP cameras at 15 frames per second with 30 days of recording at 1080p resolution and 50% motion at H.264 stream recording. We also have 5 video intercom devices. We have 350 readers, and we also require Active Directory integration. We require failover directory. We require failover archiver for 330 IP cameras. And we have 10 IDF closets with 35 readers each. Now, to be able to quote a server, we can use the table over here under the Excel file to be able to quote a server. So let's say, for example, we have 1,000 IP cameras as shown over here. So we can input our value over here for 1,000 cameras, 30 days of storage. Let's say, for example, just for the case of our sake of argument, we put in there 25 days of storage, and we want to have 50% storage motion recording. So what the total bandwidth consumption would be 2,888 megabits per second. Now, if we wanted to have a failover archiver to go with it, we can input the value over here at the bottom as to the number of failover archivers that we want to have. Also, it shows the number of workstations that you can have as well, and how many you would require. So with 1,000 IP cameras, you can see that the values over here show us what kind of bitrate we will be using if we have various number of archivers. So if we had, say, for example, 5 archivers, each archiver would be subject to approximately 595 megabits per second of throughput consumption. Whereas if we have, say, for example, 7 archivers, we would have a total of 425 megabits per second of throughput consumption. So utilizing this table, utilizing this formula over here can give us a rough idea as to how many archivers we would need and how many failover archivers you would need as well. So let's take this. Let's say, for example, we wanted to have 1,000 IP cameras, and we wanted to utilize, say, for example, 3 failover servers. Three archivers to go with it, and we wanted to have 1 single failover server to go with it. So we can utilize this table again over here to give us an idea as to what we would need to do. So as mentioned over here, if we were using 3 archivers, we can see that the bandwidth consumption per archiver would be 991 megabits per second. So in that kind of scenario, we would need to utilize the SV2000 series or the 4000 series with up to 12 or 15 hard drives installed. Now, if we were utilizing that kind of scenario, each of those servers could support up to 1,965 megabits of throughput consumption, whereas the primary directory could support up to 1,400 megabits of throughput consumption. Now, let's say, for example, we wanted to go for a slightly less powerful installation environment of, say, we wanted to have 5 archivers. Then, utilizing this information, we can see that the SV2000 and 4000 series with 8 to 15 hard drives as an archiver has a capability of 670 megabits per second of throughput consumption. So a 5 archiver solution over here could work in this kind of environment. Obviously, your main server or directory would not need to have archiving capability. So using this information over here, we can see that we would have 1 primary archiver, and we could have up to 3 archivers, such as the SV2000 or 4000 series with a throughput of 1,965 megabits per second each. and we could also quote one failover archiver to go with it. So building on that, our build of materials would be as follows. So we would have 1,000 IP cameras. So we would need to have, obviously, 1,000 IP camera licenses. We would need to have 350 readers with keypad. So we need to quote 350 keypad as well. And along with that, we would need to obviously quote our controllers, and we would also need to mention our CloudLink devices as well. Now, as we are mentioning 350 readers, we would need to quote 2 CloudLink devices, because a single CloudLink device can manage up to 250 readers. What we can also see over here under this quote is that we're having a primary directory server, we're having a failover directory, we're also having an archiver, and we're also having a failover archiver. So the failover archiver is a similar spec to the main archivers as well. So as you can see over here, we would have a failover archiver with approximately 160 terabytes of storage being used under a RAID 6 environment. So we would need to have 3 of those failover archivers. Now for a primary directory, as the primary directory server is not being used for storage capabilities, we do not need to have hard drives for recording video data on there. So the primary directory in this scenario, the primary directory server is the SV2000 series, but with no hard drive for video storage. Now, moving on from there, let's say, for example, we wanted to have a server for hosting Federation. So for Federation, we would need to, first of all, know how many sites you're going to be federating into. So in this diagram, this previous diagram that you're seeing over here, we have 3 federated sites: the standard system, which is a small installation environment, the professional system, and the enterprise system. And we want to federate them to one central location. So each one of these sites does not need to have a federation license for this purpose, as they are their own independent system. Only the site that is hosting the federation or pulling data from each of these locations needs to have the federation license. So let's say, for example, we have 3 remote locations. To be able to federate from those 3 remote locations as federation only with no recording or any other capability, the basic packages that we would need to have is obviously the Genetec Security Center base package. Along with that, we would need to have the enterprise Omnicast package, and we would also need to have the Security Center Federation connection package as well. So as we have 3 sites over here, we would need to have 3 licenses for that scenario. Now, if you are using a site with Federation for hosting, you need to make sure that the site is running the same or higher version of Security Center as your remote locations. Now, your federated site is backward compatible with up to 3 releases of the Security Center versions. So say, for example, your federated site is using Security Center version 5.9, that would be compatible with version 5.8 and version 5.7 and 5.6 of the Security Center software. Now, moving on from that, I'd like to briefly touch on the failover information that we were discussing previously. So for failover directory, we have a primary directory, and then you can have a failover directory to go with it. So its functions and capabilities, once you have a failover directory set up, is reasonably straightforward. You would have in your secure config tool, basically you would go into the database failover option and check the option for failover directory, and then select which server you want to set up as your failover server. So in this kind of scenario, what basically would happen is, let's say, for example, your primary directory goes offline. In that kind of scenario, your failover directory would come back up, would basically come online. So users that are now logging into the Security Center platform will be logging into the failover server while your primary directory is offline. So from the user's perspective, they are still able to log into the system and manage the system and view cameras and access control event information from the failover directory. Once the primary directory is back on, then obviously we can resume previous functions. Now, how long it takes for the failover directory to kick in once the primary directory is offline is very much dependent on your environment, what your server environment is like, what kind of load it's under, and so on. So it could range from anywhere from up to 10 or 20 seconds to a few minutes, depending on your environment. Now, if you have a failover directory with a SQL server always on, the downtime between a primary directory going offline and the failover directory coming online would be almost instantaneous. Once again, this is very much dependent on your network environment, but if you have a reasonably strong network with a good network connection capability, once your primary directory comes offline, your failover directory would take over because your SQL server is always on. It's a separate SQL environment. So it can basically take over as soon as your primary directory server is offline. So this basically provides a very robust solution, allowing a user to continue to utilize the Genetec Security Center platform, even when the primary directory server has gone offline. Now, when it comes to failover archiver, let's say, for example, we have, three archivers. We have an archiver, let's call it A1. We have an archiver called A2, and we have an archiver called A3. So in this kind of environment, each one of these groups of cameras are being recorded onto each of these archivers. So A1 is recording up to 334 cameras, A2 is recording up to 333 cameras, and A3 is recording up to 333 cameras as well. Now, if for some reason one of these archivers goes offline, say for example for maintenance and such, then the failover archiver would take over. So say for example the A3 archiver is offline, and in that kind of scenario, the failover archiver would take over and start recording. Now, as you can see over here, we have obviously our IP camera connection licenses, but we also need to then quote the failover camera connection licenses. So in this kind of environment, let's say, for example, we have 1,000 IP cameras total, we may want to have our failover archiver license go up to 1,000 cameras as well. If you have a requirement for, say, having only critical cameras that you need to have running, and you're not concerned about other cameras dropping offline, then you could quote your failover camera connection to support that number of cameras. So say, for example, you only have a requirement for out of your 1,000 cameras to only have 500 of those IP cameras to be critical and to be able to take over under the failover scenario, then you would need to have your camera license connection go up to 500 instead of 1,000 as mentioned over here. Now, we have basically gone over some of the how to build the bill of materials for our standard system and our enterprise system and our professional system as well. Obviously, the Genetec platform is capable of supporting far more than that. We have obviously capabilities of, going for clearance, mission control, CityGraph, Airport Sense, as well as more in-depth details about AutoView and license plate recognition solutions also. That is slightly out of the scope of this discussion. The objective of this discussion was basically to get you familiar with how to build a bill of materials for various installed environments from enterprise all the way up to, from standard all the way up to an enterprise solution for access control and video intercom as well. Now, when I share these slides, I'll also be sharing some of the other information to go with it, like PDFs, as well as links to give you more details. So I will also be sharing this Excel file that I was referring to previously, which is called the Security Center BOM worksheet. So you can utilize this Excel file to size your workstations. You can also utilize this Excel file to give you a rough idea as to what part numbers you need to utilize to build a standard system, a pro system, or an enterprise system. So in this scenario over here, you can see that the standard system Excel file is showing you what kind of licenses you would need to build a standard solution with up to 50 IP cameras. So if you wanted to quote part numbers and such, you could utilize this as a template to be able to quote your part numbers and such to go with it. So say, for example, you have a requirement for a customer that is only requiring 40 IP cameras, you can obviously then change this to 40 cameras to give you an idea as to what the part numbers and such would be for that. Along with that, we also have obviously the video intercom, and we also are quoting the access control packages to go with it. So we have tabs over here for the Pro system, and we also have tabs over here for the enterprise system, and also for the federation system as well. Also added into the Excel file is if you have an existing system and you are basically expanding that, what kind of camera licenses or what kind of access control and other functions and features you would need to add to upgrade your existing installation environment. So as I mentioned, I will be sharing this Excel file with everybody so that you can utilize this to basically give you an idea as to how you would go around building a bill of materials for the various standard, pro, and enterprise level solutions. So with this, basically, we are concluding the presentation. So you can take basically a survey by using the link or scanning the QR code on your smartphone and basically going to that section to fill in a quick survey to give us some feedback on how this presentation went. And with that, I am going to open the section up for a brief Q&A session. One moment. I will unmute people and so you can ask questions. Okay, so one of the questions that I got is, are the StreamVault servers HP based? No, the StreamVault servers are based on basically Dell servers. So we are utilizing Dell servers for the StreamVault scenario. Is this being recorded? I don't recall. Erica, did we record this? Yes, as far as I know, I think we are recording this session.
Yes, Naveed, we are recording this session and should be able to provide it at a later date through a follow-up.
Great. And are there any other questions? I don't see any other questions under this section. So how about networking for the 1000 camera system for archiver communication? Could you elaborate on that as to what you mean by networking for the 1000 camera system for archiver communication?
And Naveed, I wouldn't be exactly sure what details they were. Oh, it looks like. Yeah, so I'll just jump in real quick. So based on that, your network is going to have to support the amount of traffic and bandwidth that is going to go through it. So you would have to do verifications of an existing network to make sure that it would be able to complement 1,000 cameras based on their resolution, frame rate, and the amount of bandwidth. And there's a lot of bandwidth calculators that could do that for them. But then also too, if you're building the network from the ground up, then yes, once you have those bandwidth calculations, you would know whether or not you have to have gig or multi-gig switches and routers and capable of doing the whole network. And I think a follow-up question to that is what NICs are available on the servers. There are certain lines which are called the extreme part of the StreamVault servers that do have 10 gig NICs. I would have to double check on whether or not those are, I'm assuming that they are fiber based channels, but we do have most of the servers which are a gig fiber, a gig NIC on them. And then there's a stream that do have additional 10 gig connections as well. And that's part of the Extreme series under each of the 4,000, 7,000, 2,000.
Can you detail what you mean by live playback limit per server? So basically what you're referring to, I think, is this table over here, live playback limit per server. So it's basically referring to how much of the total throughput you're utilizing for playback. So 20 megabits per second would be the allocated throughput or network capability of the server to be able to push data out for playing back data. So as you can see over here, the total throughput, say for example, of this specific server is 570 megabits per second. So the recording capabilities, would be 400 megabits per second. So then if you're utilizing that, then you have obviously 20 megabits per second for live playback and redirection, which would be 150 megabits per second. So you're basically referring to how much information or how much data you can push out per server to be able to live playback. Now keep in mind, when you're doing live playback, there are many occasions that you're not playing back or doing a live view in high resolution. You are obviously doing a live view in maybe a CIF resolution or such. We may have, up to like 30 or 40 cameras on screen. So in that kind of scenario, basically each of those small tiles is going to be in a lower resolution as well. So that is more than adequate for that kind of environment. Any other questions?
Yeah, so Naveed, we have one more that's asking, Paul's asking if Windows Server 2012 R2 or newer. I'm assuming if you're talking about the StreamVault devices, anything that is the 2000 series and larger will automatically have Server 2019 on it. The StreamVault SV100s, 300s, and the 1000 has Windows 10 on it, so not the Windows Server OS on it. When we're talking about building your own server, though, we do go by the recommendations. So at the time of what version you have planned to install, then you would have a recommendation whether or not, in most cases, it would support lower OSs, but we would tend to go up to, if you were doing 5.9 currently, it would probably be Server 2019 as well.
Okay, one of the questions is, do you take multicast into account into any of these designs for playback or redirection? Eric, you want to answer that one?
Yeah, so from a design consideration, we do take in multicast versus unicast. That usually comes down into the bandwidth requirements that you're calculating. So most of what Naveed has gone over is based on once you've defined what architecture you're going to use, whether it's unicast or multicast, and not, we really didn't go over whether or not we would be making use of unicast or multicast up front. So we do take into consideration with our designs. My rule of thumb is unicast is great when you have only a few people who are viewing video and not necessarily viewing the same video at the same time. If I have a large number of users who are viewing the same video from the same cameras at the same time, then I want to make use of multicast at that time in order to cut down on the overall bandwidth and traffic.
Okay, any other questions?
I don't see any currently. Well, looks like we just had another one come in. And lastly, is Dell hardware equal to StreamVault? So currently the StreamVault, and I think we answered this a little bit earlier, or maybe I did it privately to a person, but the StreamVault equipment that we supply is Dell based. And so in that case, you would be using Dell based hardware and chassis that have been optimized for the Genetec solution. And Naveed, it doesn't look like we have any more questions at this point.
Okay. I'm just trying to look as to how I would upload the files that I wanted to share with you guys. Eric, would you know how to do that?
Yes, so you can either choose the file in the handout section, or you can drag and drop it into the handout section of the console.
Okay, one moment. All right, I'm still trying to find the location as to where I would share my documents. Bear with me, people. I'll just look that up. One moment. Yeah, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so I can get that. Bear with me, everybody. I'm just having a bit of difficulty uploading the file. I'm asking Eric if he can upload it on my behalf. Eric, did you get the file?
And Naveed, I haven't seen the file yet.
I sent it to you through Teams.
Okay. I just came over 1 second, downloading it, and we will. Okay, Naveed, we're going to have to, because it's a zipped file, it's not, GoToMeeting's not going to allow us to add it to the handout section. What we're going to need to do is do a follow-up with a link. I'm going to put my email address in the chat window. If anyone wants to request it, I could just send them the zip file while we get it set up in the system to be able to add this handout. All right, and Naveed, I think we can end it at that point.
All right, guys. Well, thank you very much for everybody's time. Really appreciate it. And we look forward to talking to you guys again. Thank you very much.